yeah, super excited and very special to be included in TULCA this year. Yeah, I studied also at the GTI, so I feel like my kind of visual art uh, eh, context in Galway is always TULCA has always been really important for me to come back to, and also just I've always tried to come back and see the show, so it's really special for me to get to exhibit at TULCA. And yeah, I did study at GTI, and then went to NCAD where I studied fine art painting actually, even though I don't really make paintings. But and then I also moved to Amsterdam a few years ago to do my master's in this kind of hybrid design fine art master's at Sandberg Institute, and I graduated there 2 years ago. And I think that kind of specific master's was kind of yeah, I mean, maybe becomes a bit more relevant when I kind of or obvious when I kind of talk about the work, but this kind of idea of kind of yeah, this kind of hybrid of design fine art program, I think kind of influenced my work a lot since I graduated. So yeah, I guess I am primarily interested in kind of how design systems kind of structure belonging, and how things like coins and signage and architectures can kind of quietly organize access, value, and trust, and things like this. So yeah, a lot of my research begins with how like kind of started with looking about how queer communities build coded languages and gestures as ways of finding each other within systems not made for them, that intersect with design framework, currency, bureaucracy, civic display, and kind of things like this. So basically, I kind of landed on these. I was kind of doing a lot of research in kind of queer archives and kind of ephemera, things like this, and I kind of landed upon these kind of tokens that were kind of used kind of yeah maybe around like in the 90s and things like this about basically you kind of needed these kind of tokens or coins to access queer spaces, so it's kind of like this kind of clandestine way of kind of being able to kind of permit access, and you needed to have this coin to enter the space, and to get this coin you need to be part of kind of some sort of kind of community, and this kind of idea of kind of yeah kind of creating space but also kind of restricting space for certain individuals, things like that. So I also just like this yeah this kind of notion of this coin or token, I guess, that kind of mimics the aesthetics of like real currency, or kind of this kind of idea of currency as kind of a civic design or kind of structure that is yeah is pretty much just graphic design, and kind of yeah it's an image, an illustration, font, text, like these kind of things that are kind of used to kind of insert kind of like a soft kind of power or something like this. And I like the idea that these coins kind of take that and kind of turn it into something that's not necessarily economic, but more kind of this kind of affective kind of economy around kind of desire and touch and connection and things like this. So yeah, I kind of was looking at these coins and the images that are on them and the text, and this one in particular, the one good for all night, also implies this kind of notion of like desire and sexuality and things like this. And I kind of started recreating those and kind of making my own ones, and they're not necessarily coins because I made them quite like bigger. They're kind of 30 centimeters, kind of big, but I just wanted to kind of yeah recreate them somehow, and not necessarily make them as kind of currency that could be used, because I don't think I'm necessarily interested in like the economics of currency. It's more the kind of visual language and the kind of the power of the image, I guess, that is kind of pressed into them, and things like this. So yeah, I kind of was making my own versions with text and different things, and also these kind of other these coins like often use like from fairground often have like these image of the fool or the archetype or the jester or something like this. So I kind of started making my own version of those as a kind of a parody on kind of this more kind of yeah kind of monarch kind of thing. So I was making different versions of this. And then this is also another one that I made, also kind of this size, because I kind of function my nets and not necessarily as like actual coins, but more kind of representations of them with kind of plaques or whatever. And this is the word like cottaging twice in a circle. And I was also interested in this notion of like lavender linguistics, which is kind of a term that kind of basically describes like ways that queer people kind of communicate in kind of secret and clandestine ways. And lavender linguistics, it kind of encompasses tone and gesture and kind of also lexicon. And Polari is a type of lexicon that is like a queer lexicon that is, yeah, it's not a language, but it kind of has structures of language. And cottaging is a term that means like public sex. So kind of often the words are kind of disguised as kind of more, yeah, softer kind of things that like we can communicate in public without it being kind of seen as what it actually is. And then this, yeah, it's just like an image that I was kind of looking at also. It's like from this a Flemish proverb of like basically means he who wants to get to the top must crawl into the hole. And I kind of was also, yeah, kind of just looking at different ways that the figure of maybe the fool or this kind of archetype could be kind of used as a way to kind of make fun of these kind of the images that are kind of on official currencies and things like this. And here's another one that I also made. And basically, I kind of wanted to also kind of reproduce them in different ways, and maybe make them bigger because like this obviously coin's quite small, but then I started making them bigger, and I want to make them bigger and bigger, and kind of emulate this kind of idea of like minting, but not have minting currency where like everything is like a standard or the same, but maybe there's different versions of the same coin, but in different contexts. So I 3D scanned these ceramics, and then it kind of became like a digital file, and then that way I could like blow them up, and then I CNC'd them on kind of large sheets of wood, which you can kind of see here. So they kind of became these kind of big objects. Like this one is kind of like this, and this is actually going to be shown actually at TULCA also. And yeah, I think I kind of wanted to start like chronologically because the work that I'm showing at TULCA is actually going to be, it's like a mixture of old work and new work. So I have like a new commission that I'm making for TULCA. And then also some older works. So this is kind of the older work that part of it will be shown at TULCA, and then there's a newer work that's kind of exhibited beside it. But I kind of wanted to show a kind of more how the work kind of came about chronologically, and then I'll end with the work that maybe I'm going to show at TULCA. Yeah. So I kind of also wanted to make something that you could kind of, yeah, like a sculptural thing where you kind of have to walk around it, and I like this kind of notion that you kind of have to circulate this kind of thing. It has like this dual side, and then each side of the coin has like a different image or text that yeah, so there's kind of yeah, this kind of movement of the coin. Yeah. And then basically also this is kind of maybe some of the research that's not necessarily so obvious when you encounter the work kind of directly, because I also think I don't necessarily want the work to kind of be kind of some sort of like history lesson of my research or something. It's more kind of a methodology of thinking, and then the work kind of speaks to that. But yeah, as I said, I'm kind of interested in currencies and the way in which it can kind of be undermined somehow, and histories of that, and kind of notion like this. So I was kind of looking at also like forgery and also alternative currencies as a way to kind of, yeah, to kind of undermine these kind of ideas of kind of civic design and things like this. So one thing that actually was kind of important in my thinking and kind of research is also this kind of, this idea here on the top left corner. You can kind of see it's the workers of Limerick. There's kind of in 1919, the Limerick Soviets, like a trade unionist organization, basically started printing their own currency against like direct British militarization. And so yeah, in April 1919, the British basically imposed like a, yeah, kind of like a curfew or kind of a sanction on the city. and you had to enter Limerick City, you had to kind of have papers, and it was quite like restrictive. So um, the Limerick Soviets basically kind of took over the city for 2 weeks and started printing their own currency that was actually accepted for the time that it was like a very short-lived kind of thing, but still it was 14 days of basically this money circulating, and they also kind of the money was also accepted, was like was actually traded in the city, and also even banks accepted it in exchange for sterlings and stuff like this. So I think that was kind of, yeah, and like important in my research to kind of, because I think my idea also of this kind of notion of kind of this kind of almost like naive question that I had at the beginning is like, let's say, why can't I print my own currency or something? And then kind of starting from there and seeing what happens. And then um, this kind of realization that there was this moment of, yeah, that this kind of, yeah, this alternative currency that kind of was kind of printed, designed, and circulated. Um, yeah, kind of was kind of important for my research also. And another moment was, this is kind of here, this in the red is kind of one of the first recorded tokens or coins, basically. It's like 5,000 euro token that was like printed, and kind of is like kind of represents the kind of yeah, the beginning of this idea of like how uh this idea of like how value is kind of monetized, and kind of yeah, this notion of like debt or control, or kind of the kind of coming in. So I was also looking at this researcher and artist and designer. He's actually a graphic designer. He's called Chris Lee, and he has this book around kind of immutability and kind of this idea of how the civic document and currency and passport and these kind of things are kind of all just kind of fabricated things, and that they actually they are designed also there, because they're kind of not necessarily something that is permanent or fixed, but is kind of this idea of, yeah, kind of these invisible infrastructures of state authority that kind of assign identity and ownership and trust, and that the design of it kind of regulates movement and value. So he points that the design of money is not a neutral aesthetic, but a visual consolidation of sovereignty and things, and parallels your own inquiry into how value and legitimacy are constructed through form. So yeah, these are kind of where the research kind of comes from, and this kind of idea of like this methodology of kind of making. Um, and then here's more images of the Limerick Soviets and the currency here. So I then, with this, yeah, research kind of in the background, I kind of also then, yeah, return to these kind of more kind of, yeah, fairground coins and these kind of queer tokens that I mentioned at the beginning. And kind of not, and kind of, yeah, looking at those again and trying to kind of recreate those somehow. So this is a sculpture that I made, I think, yeah, in Engage, but it was not this year, but the year before last, for the Galway Arts Festival. And it was, yeah, like again, kind of recreating these coins, these no cash value coins, sitting on top of these discarded scratch cards. In this kind of fragmented architecture, where this kind of coin is like slotted into the wall. And yeah, and then this is another version. So then the coins kind of started kind of taking different shapes and forms. And I kind of, going back again to the coins that I mentioned at the beginning, these kind of queer coins that kind of grant access or kind of permit access and stuff like that. I kind of was also thinking about the architectures of the space that they kind of permit. And so I kind of was making these coins to also kind of these like almost bar signs that they could kind of also kind of spin, like this coin that's kind of constantly spinning and never really lands on its side. Um, so this actually was exhibited at Engage, but also was in Visual in Carlo in June and over the summer. And it was nice because they kind of exhibited it actually in the bar of the also, so kind of had this kind of this context where it was last year it was Engaged in the gallery setting, but then in Visual it kind of sat in a different kind of context. And yeah, so that's just another picture of it. And yeah, I guess just thinking about also the figure. I also really like working with these materials that are kind of very like, I used to kind of work a lot more with cast concrete and kind of wood and things like this to kind of recreate kind of architectural spaces. But in the last few years, I've been really working with ceramic clay and also this plasticine. And I like how it just allows a bit of, just very kind of intimate way of making and kind of starting from nothing. And it's less, restrictive, I guess. And like you really allows for like a lot of detail. And I think there's also something in this kind of this material that you can kind of recreate. It's like a version of something else. Like it's not recreating a bar sign, but it kind of is a bar sign that exists only in the material. So if you recreate the material, it kind of goes into the sense of like becomes like a world in itself. There's like a visual language, I suppose, which is kind of what you kind of mentioned about this kind of notion of world building, where through the material, then these figures can kind of appear and they kind of occupy the space. And I kind of see them as like these kind of queer figurations, thinking about like queering this kind of notion of like this, the fool or the jester or something is this kind of figure that kind of sits outside and is a bit like mischievous and taken for granted, but then also kind of sits between, like, I guess, traditionally in the context is kind of like, state and kind of subject kind of thing. So, was also like this figure. He's kind of obviously crouched down, and then he's obviously kind of, I don't know if he's half vomiting and liquid coming out of his mouth, but then it kind of circles around where it kind of goes back in. So it's kind of like this cyclical kind of idea of this liquid kind of coming through. And on the back is kind of the words shead iad, like they, them in Irish. And this was also me thinking about this notion of kind of queer lexicon and non-dominant languages and how this idea of like, reclamation of language in kind of, and this idea of like words being kind of put upon someone and then being recycled and then kind of reclaimed in this kind of cyclical kind of thing. So this kind of came from there. And then this is kind of another series of work that I had also shown at Engage. And these are miniature bar awnings, like these shelters. And they're made out of denim and they're kind of dyed with like sun exposure kind of fabric, kind of a cyanotype, and then also just like sun exposure fabric and with text on them. So this is kind of going back again to this idea of kind of the access and the architectures of kind of spaces that kind of permit queer people to enter or to create. And I think I kind of landed on the threshold of the space rather than actually like inside it. Wasn't necessarily like intentional, but I kind of realized afterwards that also with these bar signs and these awnings, these kind of things that provide shelter, that it's kind of the moment before you enter as opposed to the actual space. So I think there's this kind of withholding access, but then also granting it. And I think I kind of seem to kind of always land on this kind of moment before. So it kind of offers some sort of potential or something. And then there's also included these scratch cards, or these kind of scratch cards, or that like losing scratch card. This kind of idea again of like and this promise of value or value with not economic value, but kind of trying to flip that idea of there's like kind of notions of value in things. And I think, yeah, I just kind of drawn to the objects in general, just like aesthetically, because I don't know, they're kind of like this kind of designed things that are kind of never really changed. Like the graphic design of them, I feel like they've always kind of had the same design forever, and they're never really going to change, never going to change. So this kind of aesthetic is just very constant, and they're just designed for kind of this moment. Like you discard, they're designed to be thrown away, I guess. So there's, yeah, it's kind of bizarre kind of things. And this is another one that I made that was showed at Engage, and it has this plasticine. So they're kind of sculpted directly onto the wall. So that's also another thing. Also with TULCA, I've been kind of here for the last like week, kind of installing the show. So that also in Engage, it was also the install was kind of a important process of kind of making the work where it kind of becomes kind of almost like a mini studio or something where I can really kind of make something in the space. Um, and yeah, so basically kind of sculpting onto the wall, and then this kind of facade of made out of plasticine, and then the cyanotype bar awnings made out of denim. Um, yeah, and yeah, this is another one. Um, I also was using beadings to kind of create this text, kind of just different ways of kind of manifesting the text onto the denim, and then these kind of welded frames that kind of they sit on top. Um, and and also the one of the coins I was like had this kinetic piece where it had this little motor. So kind of like similar to this kind of idea where like there's a bar sign that's kind of spinning, or like a coin that's also kind of spinning. So like in the space, it was kind of constantly like in this motion, and this kind of hum of the motor. Mm, Yeah, and that's another point. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of was also just treating these as just like surfaces to sculpt, and kind of thinking about how this notion of communicating, maybe not necessarily in these kind of obvious ways. Like um I was also reading about this book Cruising Utopia, which basically kind of positions like this kind of notion of also again like kind of use queer communication and cruising, positioning cruising as kind of this active kind of like always kind of looking into the future, and not necessarily the sexual act of it, but also this kind of idea of communicating in like a kind of more effective bodily way. um so I kind of wanted to kind of recreate that with kind of body parts, or kind of more effective kind of gestures in the clay. Yes, and then also part of my practice is a little bit is writing. Um, and I wrote this text that I kind of included it here just because, yeah, I don't know if it's if people are kind of interested, then I can also maybe email it to them or whatever afterwards. But um, yeah, I think I kind of was also thinking a lot about this notion of like with lavender linguistics and queer lexicon, and this kind of idea of kind of expression. And I kind of also was thinking a lot about the Irish language. I was also included the Irish language also in some of my coins. And this kind of notion that thinking of like, so basically it was, I was thinking of my granddad basically is from Kerry, and he is a native Irish speaker, but he never passed on Irish to my mother and these kind of things. And he actually, like she speaks Irish, but like she kind of learned it kind of just through school and like this thing. It wasn't kind of this kind of handing down the language. So I remember I like asked her about it once, like why he didn't do that, because he grew up in Kerry and then he went to boarding school outside of Kerry when he was like 10, to like an English school. And then from there yeah, kind of, I asked her like, oh, I wonder why he didn't kind of, yeah, pass the language on to her. And I never got to ask him, but her response was that there was kind of some level of like shame in it, or kind of this kind of hierarchy of languages. And I had been kind of doing this research with the kind of queer linguistics, and I don't know, it just kind of, yeah, kind of made this kind of connection to my granddad, and this kind of idea for him that there's also this way of speaking that he kind of never really got to, yeah, share with us and things like this. And I don't know, it kind of was a bit, yeah, so kind of connecting then my experience of this kind of research and kind of own personal experience, and thinking about him. And um yeah, I was also thinking a bit about this kind of idea of like the linguistic marketplace, which is um by this linguist, Pierre Bourdieu, who kind of writes about how, yeah, language and lexicon and modes of speech and code switching and these kind of things kind of gives you access to certain economies and spaces and social space, but also kind of real literal economy. So like basically if you know how to speak, yeah, like if you kind of grew up in a household maybe where you can kind of speak, where you can go to a job interview, then you're going to get that job, and then that gives you access to economy and things like that. And then also it kind of works in reverse, where also like if you are maybe a queer person who kind of has access to a certain type of vernacular or language or this, then you maybe gain access to certain social spaces and things like this. And also I guess with Irish, like with my granddad, and there was kind of a certain social spaces and just kind of a, yeah, a social economy that he had access to that maybe, yeah, um yeah, I wouldn't have, or my parents and things like this. Um, so yeah, I kind of wrote this text um, that kind of talks about these kind of ideas and kind of relating it to like my personal histories, and kind of going into like a broader sense of kind of ideas around these things and stuff like that. Um, yeah. So then, I guess I can talk a bit about the new work that I'm making for TULCA. And it's another series of ceramic bar signs, but they're not coins this time. So basically, um, I wanted to build kind of architectural fragments that kind of, again, kind of simulate this kind of idea of like the threshold of like a space that maybe you would enter before you enter it or something. This kind of idea of like the possibility of what's inside is kind of the thing that kind of interests me. So it's not necessarily an endpoint, but the moment of like becoming, or this kind of idea. And I think it kind of goes again into this idea of kind of using sculpture as like a methodology of kind of world building, and kind of using the material like very specifically to kind of not replicate architecture and these things, but to kind of use more fragile materials that kind of like if you put them out in the rain, then maybe they would melt, or these kind of things. So they kind of are a bit, yeah, fragile in the way that they kind of play with like weight. Like in the TULCA exhibition, I'm making these kind of cardboard architectures that in a way look like they could fall over. But then they also are holding these quite heavy ceramics that look like if they were to fall on these things that look like it could fall over, then they would like break. So um, I think the material that I kind of decided to make, like obviously the exhibition isn't open yet, so I don't have any pictures of the actual work. So I kind of just included some of the ones of just them packed in my studio. Um, And yeah, I mentioned that I kind of studied in this department that kind of is like design, fine art kind of thing. And I do a little bit of also kind of graphic design kind of uh, as well, just kind of for myself and for friends and things like this. Um, so I kind of wanted to make these kind of signs again that are kind of these silhouettes of these figures kind of on all fours, kind of in this kind of submissive position, but also maybe a little bit kind of suggestive or kind of, kind of things like this. So, and as I said, okay, I kind of wanted to recreate the tools that I would use, let's say, on my computer. If I was to make like a poster, I'd use maybe like a vector or these kind of silhouettes to make these kind of sharp kind of outlines and stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to kind of try do that, but like with my hands, like in clay. So I was thinking like if I was to make maybe a poster, then maybe I would make like a vector outline on Illustrator or whatever, and then kind of try to do that again, just actually in clay. So then I ended up making these kind of panels. And this is another one. Kind of also thinking about this idea of access and kind of playing with like entry and who can kind of is permitted in a space and gets access or whatever, and it's not, so kind of have these kind of open signs, like recreate this like neon sign, but out of something that's very like heavy and fragile, and that if it was to maybe be outside, it probably wouldn't survive very long. But it kind of kind of creates, I guess, its own world when you kind of put them all together, because all the material is obviously of the same, but it's kind of familiar. So it's like the familiar nature of the aesthetics of like graphic design, logos, bar signs, these kind of things, but made in kind of in clay. And this is another one. So there's kind of 6 panels. 3 are text and 3 are these figures in different kind of positions, like on kind of on the floor. And there's another one. Sorry, the picture's already back. But you kind of get the idea. So I think let's see. So that's the work that I am going to show for TULCA, and also some of my past work, and a mixture of kind of old work and new work that's going to be in the show, and kind of the ideas that are kind of surrounding it. And I also thought, I don't know, I kind of, because it's like I'm in the art college and like a lot of students here and stuff like that, I thought maybe I could talk a little bit, I don't know, about kind of the other parts of my practice that don't really make it into my sculptural or exhibition work, but are kind of more things that inform my work, or like this kind of more research kind of based kind of things. So maybe I can just talk about them kind of briefly. I don't know if it's interesting, but so when I was doing my master's, I started this reading group with 2 other students, and basically we wanted to kind of have like a reading group where we could kind of share text, but we didn't want it to, we kind of wanted it to be kind of performative, I guess, because me and the other people were kind of, again, like as I mentioned, like interested in ways in which language can kind of be maybe misinterpreted or like messy or kind of clandestine or these kind of things. So we started this performative reading group where we kind of would read text in kind of strange ways together, and we would bring a text and perform them, I guess, together collectively as a way to kind of maybe try access the text in like a different way that's not necessarily in this kind of more dry academic way, but a bit more embodied or kind of different way. So we invited, part of it also is having reading groups, so we invited different other artists who also kind of practice this kind of idea of like performative reading or kind of breaking up text. And Leon Haw, who is an Irish artist, I don't know if you know them, but we also invited them to do a workshop with us. And it was basically just a way we kind of deconstructing the text and making it a bit more illegible, but also legible in a different way, I guess. So I think that's also something that's kind of ongoing in my practice, and not necessarily something that kind of manifests like in exhibitions, but kind of is something that I think is kind of important in how I kind of process the ideas and stuff like this. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, and then finally, I also thought that I could mention that just because I was kind of preparing the talk, and as I mentioned, yeah, just because it's nice. Also, yeah, because it's in the college kind of setting to kind of also talk about the things that happen, not just the work, but the things that happen kind of surrounding the work. But yeah, as I mentioned, like was studying in Amsterdam, so I was living there, and up until last year, I was working at this queer techno club in Amsterdam as kind of the cultural programmer for the kind of daytime kind of program. So it was kind of bridging this kind of gap between the nightlife and the day and things like that. And I kind of just did it also because I was doing kind of some of the design for them, and it's also some of the programming. Um, and a lot of the things that were happening were kind of exhibitions and performances that were not necessarily like club-based performances or music, but it was kind of really like fine art performances and exhibitions and things like this. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but actually when I was kind of preparing the talk, I was kind of trying to give kind of like a whole picture. And yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense because there's kind of this idea of like bridging this kind of gap between this kind of nightclub um nightlife with kind of yeah another element that is kind of yeah this kind of accessibility kind of moment where because I feel like with like clubbing and kind of also queer spaces are often exist in nightlife, and then there can kind of be this experience where it kind of ends at certain points, like it kind of doesn't exist, it's not omnipresent, I guess. It kind of exists in kind of bubbles, and then once you leave that bubble there's kind of this in-between moment. um so I think actually maybe what I was kind of thinking about was maybe not at the time, like obviously, but through the programming and these things was kind of maybe trying to bridge this gap between this, yeah, this kind of fill this kind of empty space that kind of happens once you kind of leave the space. So that was kind of a nice like realization that I had when I was preparing the talk because yeah, it was just kind of something that I was doing. Um, so yeah, it's kind of yeah, not just kind of this exhibition moment, but maybe also something that's a bit more kind of lived also. So.